Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to our vBrownbag. Keep going? Oh, you're not recording yet? All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming to our vBrownbag Tech Talk here at VMworld 2015. We're here today to talk about DevOps and why, as an admin, you need to start embracing this concept. My name is Jonathan Frappier, at jfrappier on Twitter. Turn it on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Perfect. My name's Tim Jabut. I'm formerly an enterprise architect with BB&T Bank. I'm actually going to be taking on a new role with VMware. So past few months, Jonathan and I have gotten together. We actually met, almost a year ago at a collaboration commitments initiative that Matt Brender started to kind of get admins out there and learn source control. Basis was around GitHub, and since then we've kind of collaborated on a couple other small Ansible projects, and we'll talk about that a little bit more.
So what is DevOps? There is a definition that I've liked for a while, and that it's a cultural and operational model, right? It's not about any specific tool. You're not going to leave VMworld and download Photon or download Puppet and be a DevOps shop, right? There's a lot that goes into doing this. There's a lot that goes into automation. So it's really more about collaboration and enabling IT to support the business, which is really what we should be doing, right? If you watched the keynote this morning, they talked about providing services to the business and applications to the business and being able to support developers. It's not about deploying an empty VM. It's really about enabling IT to support the business and be a driver for that business.
Although I will say that this conversation was a lot more compelling until they came out with the whole software-defined Evo, enterprise data center in 2 hours. Let's see how that shakes out. Collaboration, as we kind of alluded to, this entire talk came about as a collaborative effort. Jonathan and I, having actually never met in person, came together online, came up with an idea for what if we want to do a VMworld session next year? What if we want to do whatever, a vMug session? We basically just said, hey, let's use a 15-minute time slot at VMworld and put together a tech talk. We started coming up with a framework, an abstract, filled in what we would like to do. And then basically just, we just finished it up. The silos. We want to talk about the silos?
Yeah, so Tim and I actually have fairly different backgrounds, right?
Absolutely.
Tim's coming from a bank, a larger organization. I've spent actually most of my career at startups and smaller companies. So the concept of silos, one of the things I hear people often say when you are talking about changing the IT model, whether it's automation or DevOps or IT as a service or whatever the acronym of the year is that I can't do that, right? I'm in virtualization admin. I don't talk to the physical metal admins, and they don't talk to the database admins. And there's always this concept of silos that people think is holding them back. And I look at that from the startup world, and I'm like, that can't really be. I've made changes to our underlying code base in like a Friday afternoon, and it was live on a Monday morning, but that's very different.
In the enterprise world, that's a resume generating event. Absolutely. Silos coming from a Fortune 500 bank it's as real as can be. Separation of duties is rampant, and I don't actually know how we would go about fixing that. The amount of regulation that we have to deal with just doesn't play well with the idea of, hey, let's plug a hole into this silo and kind of come up with a cross-functional team. We've thrown around the concept, but the problem is that you just don't have the bodies freed up because everybody's pulled into so many different projects. Big financials move at a snail's pace, and that really stands in the way of what the agility that automation brings to us. It's hearing your stories coming from a startup is a totally different scenario, and it is about as foreign as can be to me.
So one of the things I've always pictured, even at not quite startups, but more medium-ish size companies, is you're not going to do this overnight, but you can start having the conversations to open up the silos a little bit. So I think back to one company I was at. It was a software as a service vendor. And when I got there, IT was IT, and development was development, and QA was QA. And all of a sudden, I was chatting with somebody getting a soda one day, and he happened to be a software engineer. And that soda one day turned into playing foosball. And foosball turned into talking about my problems and talking about his problems, and realized that we shared a lot of the same problems. And we started to actually work closer together. We still had our requirements. We still had our separation of duties. We had things like, at the time, SAS 70 or SSAE 16 to comply with. But we were able to work better just by knowing each other and having those conversations around what our challenges were. So you might not, you're not going to break down the silo. Probably, that's a long process. There needs to be a lot of people on board to break down those silos and create that cross-functional team, as you mentioned. But
it's a top-down approach, though, and I think
you can poke a hole.
That's one of the big things about DevOps in general, is that DevOps is a lot of things that you just said. Brian Gracely's definition is almost spot on. There's one key component that is missing, though. If you don't have buy-in from the top down, it will never be successful. When you have an organization that we allow people to perform manual tasks over and over and over again, but yet we want to talk on one hand about consistency, those two things don't go together. Doing a task 3,000 times manually does nothing to give you the quality that you're looking for.
Not only quality, but security, right?
Absolutely.
If you're doing things manually, I've often said that you need automation to even start to claim you're secure. Automation is not going to make you secure, but if you're not automating and doing things the same way over and over again, you have no way to know that the way you set up a server is the same way I set up a server.
Well, not only that,
or an application.
The automation, if you come up with the script, if you have the blueprint, the framework that gives you the end product of automation, you've essentially just documented out your network. So you've done one of the very things that we as engineers hate to do. Who loves to write documentation? It's horrible. But if you start looking things as a modular approach in how we would break down tasks to their smallest repeatable process, that's documented out. You can follow it through logically like you're reading a book.
So speaking of that, let's take a look at automation. One of the things that's often related to DevOps is automation or configuration management. If you're a development shop, continuous integration. So, this is kind of a pretty basic example. Why don't you talk through it?
Yeah, this basically was just what was supposed to be a live example until we realized we were going to have a problem with laptop connectivity here. What if you just wanted to do something as simple as you had a basic need for a WordPress site? What's involved in that? You've got a base Linux build. Maybe you've got to add some additional app repositories. Maybe you've got to update it to the latest service patches. You may have to assign, as far as security best practices, maybe a non-standard, non-root user.
Some configuration files even that you probably got to change from your base config if it's going to go into a public DMZ or some area of your network that the public's getting to versus something internal. Right?
Software-defined everything, right?
Yep.
I mean, but something else that you had said that we were going to use as a takeaway was, you can start small. So let's just look at, hey, I've got to build a web server. And that doesn't seem very compelling until you have to build 1,000 of them. And you have to build 1,000 of them rapidly, and then you have to build 1,000 of them in multiple data centers. Yes, exactly. I used to have a full head of hair.
Me too.
So Ansible seems to be the language of choice for Jonathan and I. Both kind of took to it rather well. One of the things I really like about it is the very low barrier to entry. It is about as simple as can be. All you need is SSH access to your host and credentials, and it's got a very verbose document structure that will walk you through almost anything that you need to do. And there is a ton of people out there. Also, as a side note, I'm from RTP, which is where Ansible's based, so it makes it very nice to get some additional help.
But you look at this, this example versus these steps, right? If you had to log into a machine and type this out 1,000 times, you're very error prone. It's
Correct.
not documented.
And these are just that too.
Yeah.
These are not the actual steps that I would have to type in. These are just the subcategories that would be required, and there's multiple steps in each of these line items. That same end result is accomplished, and realistically, I could write this in approximately 3 lines of Ansible code.
Yep. And yeah, you take this into any configuration management tool. You have an inventory of systems, right? In Ansible, it's an inventory file.
Correct.
But you've got your inventory of systems. I can go run that against any category within my inventory file, or whether I'm using Puppet or Chef or some other tool. And this is now done that 1,000 times that, where we lost our hair over here.
Correct. And another real nice thing with Ansible is it's some of the hooks that it has with Vagrant. So if you're building those POC, those demo environments, or even a DR environment, whatever, if you're leveraging Vagrant, you can actually call the Ansible provider to tack on all these additional services, give you that true end-to-end result. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit, farther down there in the learning curve, but
you can get there.
Yes,
it's definitely possible.
Grab the low-hanging fruit first.
Yep, absolutely. Now, you compare this to potentially before I was thinking about automation on an everyday basis. I would, if I needed an Nginx server or a WordPress site that I was going to deploy often, I'd probably install it all in a template. Right? I'd build my VM, I'd install all the bits, and then it would be there. But now all of a sudden I start to have drift, right? Because I'm not using any automation to update things and install things and keep things consistent. So I might deploy it today and install some patches, and then somebody else deploys that template and doesn't deploy the patches, or now there's 50 of them out there and they've all been updated, but we deploy 50 more from that template that's not got the latest version of OpenSSL or some other patch that we need out there. Now you've introduced those security vulnerabilities by not automating.
The quality really goes downhill by doing that. If you're in a decent enough size shop, everybody's always doing things their own way. You're going to end up with, well, I use these templates, I use these, well, I like to build from source, I like to use packages. It's typical in our industry, right? I mean, if you do not have that consistency, you are going to get the drift, the skew. And that's one of the things that automation and DevOps allows you to embrace, is the whole, fail fast, fail often, many iterative changes, not the big change that's going to take down production. It's the many multiple changes that allow you to be very reactive and just allow your environment to be operating in peak efficiency.
And when we talk about this as code too, there was a conversation that we were having on Slack about a tool called Packer. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around why someone would want to use Packer to install an operating system when you're going to turn that into a template and then use something like Puppet or Ansible to maintain that going forward. And I think it was Jonas Roslin who actually brought up the point of, imagine being able to collaborate with somebody, you and I, who have never met or work in different offices or in different states, having this in code. Not only is it documentation, but it allows us to more easily collaborate. How else would we collaborate on building an operating system? We'd probably have to have many meetings and phone calls and WebExes and discussions, but now it's in code. Now it's in code. We put it on our code repository, whether that's GitHub or something internally. And now we can collaborate on something like installing an operating system that I would not have ever thought to collaborate with somebody on before. I would have just done it my way, like you mentioned, and somebody else would have done it their way, and somebody else would have done it their way, and now we've got all these different configurations out there.
And not only that, now it's reusable, repeatable, and again, it forms that basis of documentation.
So as we're talking through being repeatable, I think that's a great point to talk about some of the other additional benefits. We've mentioned security several times. What if I told you that by automating this and having it all in one spot and having people collaborate on it, that you've now, you've raised the bar on security because you've automated it. You know how it's done every time. Every server's configured the exact same way. And if you're not sure, a lot of these tools, you can run that playbook over again. We talk about a playbook in Ansible. If I use that to deploy WordPress and I need to make sure that my WordPress servers are all the same configuration, I can run that again. And it's not going to go and redo all the work. It's actually going to look and see, do I have the version of Nginx or Apache installed that I want? Does it have the version of Postgres or MySQL installed that I want? Does it have the version of OpenSSL that I want? And if it's there, it's just going to move on to the next thing and double check it. And if everything's cool, it's just going to come back with a bunch of green check marks that you're okay.
is, not where you are, what you want it to look like, and that forms the basis for your check. It does exactly that. It performs a check. It says, okay, I need Nginx version 178. Well, if you're at 177, it'll upgrade it. If you're at 179, the script expressly called for 178, so it will probably just leave it because it's above.
Yep. Another additional benefit that I experienced personally at the last company I was at, we were a startup, and we had a typical disaster recovery plan. We had a bunch of virtual machines that ran our application. They all had very specific configurations, and we replicated all of those to our DR site. We had all of our data being replicated to our DR site, and then we had a bunch of scripts that would go through and update the configuration of those virtual machines so our application would work on the network and the DR site. Pretty typical, I think. It's always what I've heard. It's what things like SRM do. It allows you to replicate things. It allows you to bring things up on specific networks.
I didn't think people did DR.
Well, there's that.
It's always an afterthought.
But we were sitting down and we were automating our application install and starting to embrace some of these new tools. And I looked at my boss and I said, this is our new DR plan, which, by the way, we were trying to improve. But by automating in our production site, we had the tools, the scripts, the configuration necessary to deploy this rapidly in DR. So now all I had, my data was already there. Instead of worrying about how these virtual machines are configured, how the application was configured, I spun up new VMs, we put our application on it, and it deployed from that playbook, and we were done. So you're enabling DR through this in a lot of cases. I mean, certain applications you're not going to be able to do this for, but if you can, DR is another benefit.
Why wouldn't you?
Yep.
Exactly. I mean, it is just that. It's an additional benefit that's a byproduct of what you've done. And one of the really neat things as well is, what about a true pre-prod environment? What about being able to QA and validate your production environment? How many places actually do that? Well, if you can use the same script that you deployed into prod to deploy into a pre-prod environment, and the same script additionally becomes the fabric of your DR plan. It solves a lot of issues with one minor switch, adopting a DevOps methodology that forces you to think in repeatable tasks that are clearly defined.
I've watched developers troubleshoot bugs that were because QA didn't flip one of the switches properly. Days on trying to find how to reproduce this bug, and it was all because a configuration file was missed and something wasn't updated.
Yeah,
consistency.
I'm sure we could all talk about dirt at our employers, but not to make it a mudslinging contest.
Yep. So a few lessons learned that I've come up with over the years. Compared to scripts, scripts aren't bad, they're just stupid. A script is going to do exactly what you tell it to do. And it's going to, if you run that script over and over again, it's going to do those all over again. But as we talked about before with Ansible, it's going to check. If it's there, great. If it's not, it's going to move on. Start small. You don't need to automate your data center on Monday. You're not going to go back to the office on Monday morning and automate your switches and all of your servers and your databases and your DR plan. But you know what? You might be able to automate creating user accounts. Go look through your ticketing system. What's that thing that you have to do that takes up 2 or 3 days of your month that you're doing every month?
Automate the things that are the most painful first. Grab the lowest hanging fruit. The amount of time that you freed up by those tasks now affords you the opportunity, plus you're learning. I mean, this entire thing is, it's just like learning a language. It's like learning any skill. If you don't do it, it's muscle memory. You'll never learn it if you don't consistently do it every day. Spend 15 minutes, spend 30 minutes. Do something as simple as what we just showed as deploying a web server. I mean, I've used it to automate the rebuilding of my media server at home because I made a bad move on Sunday morning and blew away everything with a RM slash and missed another slash. Don't do that. But that was actually, that one thing formed the basis of me actually learning Ansible. Because I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to use this as a lessons learned. I already made a mistake that you beat yourself up about, but hey, if I'm gonna rebuild it, I want to make sure that I can rebuild this over and over and over again if this were to happen again. And that's the way it went.
All right, everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you.